Hi, welcome back. I'm Sally. If you haven't visited my channel before, I'm all about experimentation with art supplies, creating mixed media, portraits, and whatever else strikes my fancy along the way. I like to show you different ways to push your art supplies to do things that maybe you didn't initially intend for them to do. Poke around. I have lots of videos that you can explore. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and I'd love it if you would subscribe. And if you'd like to know when I upload new videos, hit that notification bell. So today I thought I would bring you along. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with different media and what I can do to create some interesting backgrounds. So I played with this one, with these supplies on this watercolor paper over the last couple of days, and I just kept adding to it, and it had some really cool stages and some really ugly stages. But I use primarily acrylics and alcohol, and this is 91% alcohol, even though my label says 90%. And then I used an acrylic ink. For my initial layer, I used just a regular acrylic paint. And then for the second layer, where I added color, I used high flow acrylics. And that's then at that stage is when I added alcohol. So yeah, so I'm going to show you now some close-ups of different sections of this so you can see more closely what kind of texture we got here. I initially started out thinking, how can I create cracks in my paint without using an actual Crackle medium? And I knew there was a way that I did a long time ago, and it finally came to me. So I will show you that here in just a little bit, but that was the initial layers that I put down on here, with a thick layer of acrylic paint and then a thin watery layer of several different colors of acrylic paint, and then heating it very quickly before anything dried. And that's when I got the big cracks. There's some smaller cracks too. Wherever you put the acrylic paint, the initial layer, where it's thinner you'll get smaller cracks, and where it's thicker you'll get bigger cracks. So that's what I'm going to show you first, I think, and I'm just going to maybe just kind of recreate this. I'm sure it'll change along the way. What I just did this morning, just so you know, I was consolidating some gesso. I had this big tub of gesso, and it was almost gone, and so I wanted to put what was left in this tub into a smaller container, which I did. And then whatever was left in here, I just put a small amount of water. There we go. I just put a small amount of water in here with the leftover gesso. So it's just real watery. So I had all this Crackle on here in different textures that I got after I crackled it. And I put a wash of this real watery gesso on top, and then sprayed it with alcohol, with my spray bottle of alcohol. And that's this very top layer is what you see, all the little like puddles and spots. So I thought, well, that's a good place to stop, because I think there's about 6 layers on here. So I'm just going to start all over again. And I will warn you, it can get very messy and very wet. Okay, so the first thing I did was just to spray my paper off with I don't want it like dripping wet, but I want it pretty wet. And then I just used a light layer of, a light color of acrylic, but you want this layer fairly thick. So just get it all over. I just sprayed it first, because I want this layer to stay wet long enough for me to get the paint on top of it. If this layer isn't wet, when you heat it, you won't get cracks. So you got to work kind of quickly. But as long as it's wet enough, I'm going to try and get it thick pretty much everywhere. Usually when I get out to the edges it thins out a little. And it doesn't matter if you have brush marks, that's just going to add to the texture. But I think that's pretty. That's wet enough. Have lots of water handy for your brushes. And then I have turquoise phthalo. What didn't work well for me doing it this way by just dropping color on was the nickel azo gold. I think if I'm going to use that again, I'm going to have to thin it down somehow before I put it on here, because it just didn't move like the rest of them did, which was kind of surprising. Get a good amount of paint everywhere, because you'll see in a minute. I mean, I guess depending on the coverage you want, but pick colors that are going to intermix well. Now, if I can do this quick enough, I'm going to put some nickel azo gold because I love it. I could try and leave it off, but I'm going to try and get enough water in my brush here to drop some onto the. I just made it really, really wet on my palette because I want it to move with everything else. It mixes in so well with the blues, and it kind of changes the green. So, okay, I better get going here. I'm just going to spray it with a lot of water. And I was going to get a towel to put down on my table, and I forgot. Too late now. But I want all this paint to move and mix. So we'll try and keep it on the paper. We'll see what happens. You gotta kind of have eyes everywhere and just move it till you like it in one area and then move it another direction. It doesn't have to move all the way out to the edges. But what's cool about this, there goes the green off, is when you're done, I mean, you can make art on top of this, or it can be art all unto itself, or when it's dry you can cut it up and use it for card fronts or tags or different things that you like to do. I think I'm going to leave that because we have it really thick here. But what I'm going to do is start heating this. And this process takes a long time. Before I start, it's wet enough. I think I can wait a minute to tell you. If you'd rather use a hair dryer, use high heat but low air, if that makes sense. Because like this is all I have out here right now is my heat tool, and it has a lot of force to it. It's high heat, but it has a lot of force. You can see it's already cracking. So it's going to move the paint maybe more than I want it to, but that's what I have. A hair dryer on high heat but low volume or whatever, power, what might work better. But you'll see it start to crack as it starts to dry, and that's because the paint underneath is still wet. And if you put the paint underneath on with like your brush strokes going all in one direction, that's the direction of the cracks you'll get. If you vary it, like if you go back and forth or slip slap back and X's, those are the directions of your the cracks you'll get. So I'm just gonna turn the camera off and come back when this is done, because it's gonna take a long time and you don't need to listen to my blow dryer going that long. Maybe if I go right here on the edge, I was going to try and get it to where it's really, there it goes, see right there? Right here at the bottom. Once it really starts to dry, then you see the cracks start to come right away. I push some of this paint away. This time the green didn't move as much as some of the other colors. I kind of lost the Nicolazo gold. Actually, I wonder if I can just put some more in now. Maybe. It might just disappear. Maybe if I put some over here. I'm sure the edges have started to dry too much already. Like right there. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go away and get this all dried off and then I'll be back. I'm coming back for just a second because I wanted to see if I spray alcohol into this now, if I can get spots that'll stay. And I'm going to do it just far away and get these little craters, and if I dry that alcohol off right away, I think I can get those little spots to stay on here. It's not going to work so much where it's really, really wet. Ooh, that's really cool there. If that'll stay, I'll be happy. Get them in some spots, and then other spots they just kind of, whoops, fade away. Okay. One more tip before I forget to tell you. Keep your dryer moving, because as wet as this is, if you keep it in one spot too long with that high heat, you'll blister the paint. It'll just start bubbling up, and then it'll peel off your paper. So just keep moving it around. You can hold it, you know, for a couple of seconds and then move it and hold it and move it. But don't keep it for a real long time in any one spot. Once your bottom layer of paint, that first thick layer of paint, is dried enough that it's not going to crack anymore, you can just stop and let this dry, you know, air dry the rest of the way. You don't have to continue to heat it with the heat tool. Once you notice that there are no more cracks forming, and if you know, if you want to just stop, because it does take quite a bit of time because it's so wet. If you want to stop at that point, just let it continue to air dry. It's pretty buckled. If you want to avoid that, you could always, you know, take a separate sheet of paper out of the tablet and tape it to a board, and that'll help prevent some of the buckling. It will go flat again eventually once all the water is evaporated out of the paper. But so this is what we got on this initial layer. So wherever it was the thickest underneath, where you see the darkest blue there, you're going to get the really big cracks. Over here, I think we got some smaller ones there in the green section. And what was strange this time is that green gold paint just didn't move very much. So I don't know if I'm just not hitting it enough with enough water initially. I could just, you know, keep that in mind. If I do this again, I'll move whatever's not moving well with the water. I'll move it with the brush a little bit to get it going. I like this spot right here. So, and then the lighter blue, the teal blue, didn't really crack as much as the other colors did. And it may just be that it was, the paint underneath was thinner there. But you get the idea. You can get some really cool background effects going. You can make a really big mess. I didn't do too bad. There weren't many pages left in this tablet of paper, so that's probably a good thing. Otherwise I would have ruined a lot of them with what went over the edge. But I usually like to just put an old bath towel down, and then that way I can tip the paper and just let it run off the edges, where I didn't get a whole lot on my edges here because I just really didn't want it to run all over my table. But I kind of tapped in some of the Nicolazo gold around the edges I mean, I knew it wasn't going to crack, but I just wanted some more color there, so I just tapped that in as I was drying the paper. So, I'm going to let this dry really well. I may even let it dry overnight, and then do another layer. And so I'll be back and show you what we can do on top of this. Okay, this has dried overnight. It dried pretty flat. If I put some heavy books on top of it, it would go back flat again, or I can spray the back lightly with some water and then put some heavy books on it and it should completely flatten out, but I'm not going to worry about it. It's just an experiment to show you guys what's possible. So I was thinking about, okay, now what do we want to do with this? And rather than doing more layers, complete layers on top of this, I think I want to isolate some of the pieces or sections that I like the best and try and highlight those. And there's a couple of ways we could go about this. I just have some, this is some old artwork, but I cut some little windows. And I think it helps me anyway to be able to like isolate without being distracted by the rest of the piece. So that's one way you can do it if you want to use, you know, rectangles, or if you have some mats, maybe photo mats that you've already, that you aren't using that you want to use. But you know, me in circles, I'm just going to use some things I have laying here around me and find some spots that I particularly like. So I have just a couple tape rolls. You have a funnel. I mean, in this case, you can go inside and outside your roll of tape to get like a double circle. If it's something that you can't see like this, I'm not going to be able to see through it, so I would have to like isolate a section that I think I want and just put it down that way. The other thing I have laying here is this Caran D'ache little palette. It's like smooth on one side and rough on the other. This is nice for like Neocolor 2s. You can scribble and get a lot on this rough side and then wet it and use it like watercolor. Anyway, but then so I have this oval that I can kind of isolate and see. So I'm going to go ahead and get this marked off. If you're to do this and you're thinking about maybe you'll use some water on top of it, which I think I might want to maybe go around some of these shapes with a Stabilo pencil and activate it. And if I do that, I want to make sure that I use a waterproof marker when I mark my circles or whatever shapes you're using. I have this set of Staedtler pigment liners. So it has a 0.8 millimeter marker in it, which is probably good enough to, you see that better there, to mark my circles, and I don't have to worry about them bleeding. I could just mark them with the Stabilo, but I may not want to go around each shape with the Stabilo, maybe just some of the bigger ones. I'm not sure at this point, you know, I never am. So anyway, I am going to go off camera and get this marked off, and then I'll be back and I'll show you what I'm thinking about doing. Okay, I've drawn just random circles, some overlapping, larger, smaller, in between sizes, and I'm going to use just an acrylic unbleached titanium, and I'm going to paint around the outside. So I'm going to leave the circles open and paint basically what's behind it or the background with unbleached titanium. I debated whether to go light in the background or use like a Payne's gray and go dark, but because the unbleached titanium is the color I used of the very first layer, that real thick layer that I put down first, I just decided I would just go light, and then maybe I'll doodle or something in the background after it's completely dry. and that way those would show up better on a lighter background. So rather than bore you just watching me paint around all these circles, I'm going to do that off camera and I'll be back.